All right, so we have coding from scratch. First, we'll start off with HTML. What is HTML? HTML is a hypertext markup language. It is used more than to just have text sitting on the page. You can have images, links, tables, articles. Basically, everything that you see on a website started off with HTML. That was the markup language to put everything in its place.
Okay.
So then we have the HTML document structure. So what I'm going to go ahead and show you is what that looks like in code. So I'm going to start off with creating a folder on my desktop. New folder, I'm going to call it project. And then in your text editor of choice, I have VS Code, that's Visual Studio Code. You can open it. So I've gone ahead and I've opened my project folder, and I'm going to create a new file, and that file is going to be index.html. So any project that you come across or that you work on, there's always going to be that index.html file. It's kind of like your root file in a sense. And this folder, you'll hear it as the root directory. So this is our root directory and this is our root file. So with any HTML structure, and what's cool about VS Code is if I type in HTML and I select the second one, HTML5, and I hit enter, it gives me the entire setup for HTML document structure. But we're going to go ahead and ignore these for now. That's something that you'll learn later on. But essentially, the structure starts off with doc type. That's saying this is a document type HTML. Then after that, you'll have your opening and closing tag. And before I get into opening and closing, let's just look at a tag combination by itself. We see here that we have HTML, and then inside of there, we have length. And this is called an attribute. You can think of that as like a property, a characteristic of a tag or an element. So this is the HTML element. And it has the attribute language, which is equal to EN, which stands for English. So here we also have our carets. We have our carets here. Well, I call them carets. And that's indicating an opening tag. Here at the bottom, this is the closing tag, and we indicate that with a /. So they kind of have the same structure, except the closing has a /. Inside of the HTML tag, we have our head tags. Inside of the head tags is where you're going to find links to other files, for example, like a JavaScript file or a CSS file. You'll also see meta tags, which you'll see here. This you'll learn later on, so I don't want to go too in depth with that, but essentially this is helping with responsiveness, so that when you are looking at a window or an application or a website on different devices like a laptop, a desktop, or a phone, it kind of goes to scale and it looks right. So that's what that has to do with. After the head, you have your body. This is where you're going to spend the majority of your time, where you're going to write most of your code is in between these body tags. Anything that's written in between the body tags is going to be visible on the website. So that's where you see, if we look at a website here, say we look at starbucks.com. Everything that we are seeing here was written inside of the body tag. So we can see that. Anything that was written in the head is not visible on the page. But we see here, Starbucks, the best coffee, etc. I can't see all of it. But where that's written is in between the title. So here, whatever you write in between your title, which is in your head, is going to show up on the tab of the window. So that's pretty much the basic structure of every HTML page, and we'll go ahead and discuss different elements that you can use. Are there any questions so far on what we've discussed? Thumbs up if you feel good about it. All right, cool. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on. So we'll go ahead and discuss structure elements. You'll see these elements used frequently in any HTML file. We have div, which is used to create a generic container for content. Essentially, that's just different divisions of your page. Header, it's new to HTML5 and it's used to mark the header part of the body. So if we look at that Starbucks page here, this white and green part is the header. It's at the top of the page. Usually what goes in the header is the navigation. It doesn't have to be, but that's just usually what it is. Footer is the counterpart to header. That's at the bottom. That's where you usually see your social media links, contact us at the very bottom of the page. Nav is used to mark up the navigation area, and section provides structure around a block of content, grouping in a logical format. So section and div kind of go together. They're just slightly different. Div is more generic, where section, let's say you were writing an article and you had different sections, things of that nature. So if we go ahead and create something here, let's say I wanted to have a header. I'm going to have my opening and then I'm going to have my closing. Inside of the header, I'm going to have my navigation. So that's a nav tag. So I will have my opening and I'll have my closing. And then that takes care of the top part. And then maybe I want to go ahead and create a couple divs to do different sections of my page. This is how you can kind of start writing out your HTML files. It's kind of like an outline, like you did for a paper in some school somewhere. And then at the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and have a footer to put my social media in there later. So right now, as I've written, nothing's going to show up on the screen because I haven't written anything in between. So these are used to outline, but what actually shows up on the page is whatever we write in between these tags. So this is setting up my page. I'm going to go ahead and create a small portfolio page or a small about me page. So this is my outline for it. With that, you have your content elements. So you have your heading tags, which is different from a header tag, which is different from a head tag. Now, those can get confusing for some people. So a heading tag is kind of just like a heading of a section or a div, and it's going to be larger than the rest of the text. So H1 is going to be your largest, where H6 is going to be your smallest. So if I go back to here, I'm going to have a couple heading tags. Let's say I have an About Me section. I have a My Skills section. And let's say I have My Experience section. So I have each of these divs have a heading: About Me, My Skills, My Experience. Then we have our paragraph element. So that's a smaller text usually to describe whatever you need to describe in your different sections. So I'll go ahead and add some paragraphs with some dummy text. We'll go ahead and do some word wrap here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. So then let's just go ahead and take a quick look of what this looks like so far. There we have my page. It's a little zoomed in. But we have the beginnings of my page here. We'll go back and talk about some other elements. We have italicized, which can be shown as EM and I. EM is treated as important, and it means emphasis. So visually they're going to look the same, just like a regular italicized, but EM is going to be treated as important. So let's say that you're looking at a visually impaired website, or some websites have that feature where you can click on it and it's for the visually impaired. EM is going to look a little bit different because it's emphasized. If you want to show bold, you do strong. Ordered lists, you begin with, it's kind of nested tags. So you'll start off with OL, which stands for ordered list, and inside of there you'll have some list items. So if we go back to our code, and let's say in my skills I have an ordered list and I want to list out my different skills. Oops. So in here, I'm going to have my list items, and let's say HTML is one of my skills. Oops, closing tag. Then we have CSS is another skill I have. And let's say JavaScript. It's another skill I have. Oops. Save that, and if we see what that looks like, we have an ordered list. Same thing goes for unordered lists, except instead of OL, you use UL, and that just stands for unordered, and that just looks like bullet points. Go and change that. We have the bullet points now. Then we have images. Images are a little bit special in the sense that they are self-closing. They don't need a closing tag. They don't need the caret with the /img. It's self-closing. With the image tag that has an attribute, which is source, that's essentially telling you where the source of the image is. So that could be an actual website, www.something/, whatever the image name is, .jpeg or PNG, or you could have a relative file. And what that is you write your file path. So let's pretend that I had a picture inside of my project folder, which is my root directory. So if I wanted to put an image of myself here, and we're pretending that I have the file in the directory, I'm going to put src equals, and then in quotations, I'll have the name of the image. So me.jpg is what I'm going to pretend the image is going to be. And in there, we have the file path. Since it's in the root directory, we don't have to put anything before it. It automatically is going to look inside of this folder and direct it. So if I had this image inside of another folder inside of my project folder that was called images, then I would write that folder name / and then the name of the file. If we look at this, nothing's going to show up because this file doesn't exist. But I can also take an image that exists online, and it's going to follow the exact same format. So we have image, our attribute source, then inside of quotations, and then we'll close it off with the closing little caret there. And then I'll go ahead and steal an image from the internet, and let's go to Google. Computer's running a little slow today. All right, and then let's put kittens. Look at some images. And this guy looks cool. So we'll right click, and then I'm going to copy image address. And then right in between the quotations, I'll go ahead and paste that. This is an extremely long one. They're usually not this long, but since it's off of a Google search, it has a big pathway. So I'm going to save that. And then if we go back here, we see that image. So that's how you can put an image from the internet, or you can get one that's on your computer. You just have to make sure that if you're using one on your computer, that it is in fact in your root directory. That way you can refer to it. So the next element that I want to go ahead and discuss, and this is, oops, wrong button, is the anchor tag. And the anchor tags you're going to use a lot. You're going to use that for navigation. You're going to use it for linking to other websites. You're going to use it for linking to your social media. You're going to use anchor tags quite a bit. So the anchor tags have an attribute as well, similar to image, which is instead of source, it's href, which kind of does the same thing. So if we look at an anchor tag, we have href. We're going to set it up there. And then whoever has a dog, could you temporarily mute yourself, please? Thank you. All right. So in the anchor tag, we have href, and this is telling us to go somewhere. We're going to put the address here. So same thing for images. You could have it in your root directory and then you can link it. So let's say you had multiple HTML files and you had different pages of one website, right? Some websites have 5 pages, etc. So we want to take it to another HTML file. All we have to do is write that file name in there. So let's say that there was a portfolio page. So I'm going to quickly make this file just so you guys can see. All right, so if I put that here and then this, whatever I put in between these opening and closing anchor tag, A tags, is going to be what shows up on the page and is going to be clickable. So I could put an image in between here, and then that image will be clickable and take me to the portfolio.html page, or I can just write text. So that's where you have icons that you can click on. So they put an image of an icon, and now that icon is clickable and will take you to where the href is pointed to. So if we look at that here, we see portfolio pops up. I can click it, and it took me to that file. And if you remember, my portfolio.html file, I just had this as my portfolio. So that's how that works. And then if I wanted to link it back, instead of having to hit the back button, we can just put in our code. Another anchor tag. And we're going to point it to the index.html. Now this entire sentence is going to be clickable. Refresh that. I want to go back to the index page. You see how that all looks clickable. We click that and it took us back. Now we can do the same thing for if we wanted to go to a different website. So let's go to Facebook. And with the anchor tags, when you put a link in there, you have to include the protocol here, the HTTPS. Put that in there. Save that. Let's check it out. My internet's running extremely slow. But that would eventually take you to Facebook. There we go. So it takes you to Facebook. Go back. Now, if you wanted to have this link open in a separate tab, let's say you wanted whomever's at your site to remain on your page, but if they wanted to click this, it would just open a tab, then you would add another attribute, and that is target, and you'll set that equal to underscore blank, and everything's wrapped in quotations. So underscore blank, refresh. I don't know if that refreshed. Okay. And now you see it opens in a separate tab. Any questions so far? All right, I'll take silence as no.
This is Cedric. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Hey, what's the editor you're using again?
Visual Studio Code. So you can download that at code.visualstudio.com.
Visual Studio Code.
Mm-hmm. And it's good for Macs, Windows, and Linux. So no matter what operating system you have, you can use it.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions?
Oh, I was using the chat to respond to you.
Oh, I don't look at that. Yeah, so just go ahead and talk out loud.
Okay, so would it be better if we just use the mic rather than
Yeah,
Zoom
just
chat?
unmute yourself and go ahead and throw a question at me. Feel free.
Okay, well, I mean, sometimes when I don't respond, like it's because I use the chat. Like if you
Oh,
ask me a
okay.
question, like,
Yeah, just feel free to just unmute yourself, and because I can't see the chat window, so just go ahead and just talk freely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have one question.
Yep.
When you're I jumped in just after you started. So when you open up that document, the first document,
Mm-hmm.
was that already like when you open up that second document, was that already pre what's the word? With all the eggs, was that when with this editor?
So you're asking when I open the file, was all this code written, like the template for the HTML file?
That's correct.
Okay, no, so when I create a new file, so let's say I create another file that's like skills.html. When I open it, it's completely blank. So with this text editor, I just write HTML, and then I select HTML5, and then I hit enter, and then it does it for me.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of text editors. They do a lot of this. So if you see me typing and I'm like, whoa, she's typing super fast, the code editor does a lot of it for me. All right, any other questions on what we've covered so far? All right, we'll go ahead and keep trekking. So we'll go ahead and discuss CSS now. So we have our markup language. As we look at our HTML file, it looks pretty boring. It's pretty basic. It's just black and white. It's our outline of our page. But CSS is going to add all the design to it. So CSS is kind of viewed as an art form in programming because there's so many ways to do it. There's a lot of trial and error. There's different color schemes, different fonts. There's a lot involved in CSS and a presentation of something. So what CSS actually stands for is Cascading Style Sheets. It was developed as a way to style HTML and create reusable styles, also called as rules. So let's say you're looking at your page, right? And you have different parts of your page that you want to look similar. So if we look at Starbucks still open, our Starbucks page here, we see that they have different sections here that are kind of styled differently. But right here, this is these two are kind of styled the same, right? They have the same font, the same size. These are italicized. It has this little link here that when you hover, it turns gray. They kind of got some uniform style going on. So there is a CSS rule, I'm sure, that they wrote that they reused on this section, and then they reused on this section. And then there was another one here to make the font white instead of black, and things of that nature. So you use CSS to create those rules so you can reuse them, because it's really annoying to having to write line per section per element what you want that to look like. So if we look at our code, imagine if I had to write the style for this H1 and this one and this one. I'm writing the exact same code over and over again, when instead I could just write that once in my CSS file and just link it to all the H1 tags, which I'll show you guys how to do in a minute. CSS is called cascading because the styles from a parent element also apply to its descendants. So what that means is kind of like, you can think of genes. You know, we inherited some genes from our parents. I inherited thick, dark hair from my dad. I have this shape eye from my mom, that kind of thing. So whatever is written, so for example, if we apply a font style to HTML element, all other elements and tags in that document will have the same font styling applied to them. So what that means is, if I applied a CSS rule for HTML, everything that is inside of the HTML tags will be affected. So the last HTML tag is down here. So all of this is in between those HTML tags, meaning anything that I do to the HTML, if I say font color blue, size 20 pixels, italicized, whatever I choose is going to be applied to all of this. Same for H1, right? So if I have a rule for H1, it's going to apply to every single H1 tag. So we have different CSS properties. One of them, there's a million out there, but one of the biggest ones is display. So display has 4 values: block, inline, and none. Block makes an element a block style, meaning you won't let anything sit next to it on a page. So display block, let's say you have 2 images right next to each other. If they're on block, they move down because it doesn't allow anything to sit next to it on a row. It shouldn't say page, it should say a row. So there's different rows. And if there's 2 images, block is going to move them down. Inline block is going to still format that in a block, but they can sit next to each other. So there's kind of like, there's more space, but they're still on the same line. Inline makes them sit on the same line, but without formatting it like a block. So instead of that space, they'll just be right next to each other. And then none makes everything disappear. So none is useful for when you start incorporating JavaScript, and let's say a user clicks on a button and you want to filter out results. So you're going to make anything that doesn't match those results have display none, because you don't want it to show on the page. So that's like when you're like searching for electronics on Amazon, right? Everything else that they sell kind of disappears and only the electronics show up. Position property has also 4 values: absolute, static, relative, and fixed. So static is the default value. So if you never write a position property in your CSS, then its default value is static. Absolute, the element is positioned relative to its first position. Relative, it's relative to its normal position. So if I put left 20 pixel, it adds 20 pixels to the element's left position. Position fixed, the element is positioned relative to the browser window. So when you move your browser window smaller and bigger, the position is fixed of that element. And these are kind of hard to describe. They're easier to be shown, and they play around with. So different properties can move elements around, and that takes me to the box model. So if you look here, inside of this box is the content area. So that's your element. If we're looking at it, let's pretend we're looking at the image, right? This is our content element. Outside of that, we have our padding. And then outside of that, we have our border and then our margin. With the content element, we can control the height and the width, right? We can alter those. But outside of that, we can alter the padding. So if you put padding equals something, then it's going to be equal on each side. Or if you want the padding on the top to be different than the bottom, or the right from the left, or the right from the top, whatever combination you want to do, you can control just that portion and be like, okay, padding top is this, but padding right, bottom, and left is something else. Same with border, same with margin. So let's go ahead and apply some CSS. First thing I want to do is I want to create my CSS file. So I'll create a new file, style.css. Second thing I want to do is I want to link this, where'd it go? This CSS file to this HTML file, because otherwise whatever I write in here is going to take no effect. So we have to link them, and we're going to do that in the head. So we'll use a link tag, then we'll use an attribute called rel, which stands for relation. And I'm going to say it's a style sheet. That's the relation of this file to this file, style sheet. Then I'll href, tell it where it is, and put the name of the file. Now, same as images and everything else, if I had this style sheet inside of another folder called like style sheets or something, I would put that pathway. But since I don't have that, I'm just going to leave it as is, then I'm going to close. Link is self-closing, just like image is self-closing. It does not need a closing tag. So I'm going to save that, and now this HTML file is linked to the CSS file. Oops. So let's go ahead and add some properties. So let's say I wanted to change the background color of my entire body. Now remember, if I write something for my body, it's going to affect everything that's inside the body. So that's all of this. So the way that you write it is you write what you want to target. So I want to target the body element. So I write the word body. Then I have my curly brackets. And then inside of the curly brackets, I'll write the property with a colon and then the value. So the property I want to play with is background color, and let's say I want it to be yellow. If we look at that, we have the background color yellow. Now let's say I wanted all my H1s to be in the middle of the page, so I'll do text align and center. And then maybe I'll do font, I'll do color, which means font color. I always want to write font color, but you just write color. And then you write, let's say we want it to be white. Oops. And let's say I want the font size to be 40 pixels. Save that. We see how it changed. Now, white was not a good choice. So let's say blue. We have that changed. Image, if I want to control the image, let's say I want to make the width 85%. We see how it changes. It's a little huge, so let's make it 45%. And this means relative to the page. So I want it to be 45% of the page. So it's almost half of the page, right? If I want it to be 90%, we'll see that it gets much bigger. Okay, there's only about like 10% of the page left. So that's how we can control that. This is relative, and that's really good if you want to make your site responsive, right? So it's relative to the window size. And there we can go ahead and see. Now, another way, so this is how you target elements, right? I'm just elements meaning anything that is in between these little tags. I could target divs. Say I wanted to make all divs have the background color of something. I could target H1s, paragraphs, anything, footer, whatever's in between those tags. Now, we discussed earlier talking about reusing styles. That's where you're going to incorporate classes. So in CSS, you can incorporate classes and IDs. For as far as CSS is concerned, they both work exactly the same way. But there is a huge difference between classes and IDs. Classes you can reuse as many times as you want. IDs is only one unique ID. And the reason for that is for JavaScript. And I'll go ahead and show you. So if we say, let's take out this H1 styling, right? And I want this to be, I want to call this class blue. So with classes, you use a period before it. So this is saying, hey, this is a class, the class name is blue. So here, let's say I want this H1 to be blue. I don't want all of them. So I'll write class, this is an attribute, equals, and in quotations, the name of the class, blue. So we save that. We see that only this one is blue. And then these here are back to their normal way, right? They're not centered and they're black. So if I wanted to reuse that, let's say for skills, right? I want to use the class blue for skills. We show that here. About me still the same, skills has now changed. I can also use these classes for paragraphs, right? So let's say I wanted this paragraph to be the class blue. I can use that here. And you see that's changed. But now, if you notice here, this H1 and this P tag are both class blue, which are both inside of this div. So instead of writing this class blue twice, why don't we just put it in this div? Made it a little bit bigger. But we see that it applied to all of this, right? This made it a little bit bigger because the reason is it scaled the difference between H1 and paragraph, like the same ratio that it normally has. Before I was controlling it and saying that they were both, where is it? 40 pixels. And then here, I'm saying we're going to start off with 40 pixels being the base and then scale the H1 with that in mind. So we see the difference here. You can do the same thing with IDs, except with ID, you use a hashtag. And then here we would write ID. I can write ID multiple times. And it does the same thing. But with IDs, you only want to use those once. because the reason why is when you are incorporating JavaScript, let's say you want to get information off of your document. Let's say a user typed in their name, they're filling out a form, right? And you need to get that information. If you have multiple IDs for different things, like I called this ID blue, I called this ID blue, I called this, let's say something over here, I have ID blue here. When you're trying to grab an element by its ID in JavaScript and you say, okay, the element that has the ID blue, grab that, and you want that to just be the name of a form, your JavaScript's going to freak out because it doesn't know which one. They're like, hey, there's 3 ID blues. Which one are you talking about? So you want to be mindful that you only use ID once. Like you can have multiple IDs, but the blue ID is unique. You don't use the blue ID anywhere else. And that pretty much concludes my lecture today for HTML and CSS. Are there any questions?
No.
I'm sure there'll be later, but not now.
Okay. Well, if you do have questions, be sure to hit up your mentor. You can hit me up. We're all available on Slack. Schedule your code reviews if you feel like you need that extra help. And yeah. Anybody else have any other questions, concerns?
Yeah, just is there any are there any assignments or anything that we need to do?
So in your first week, you want to make sure that you are signing into the LMS. So that is, oops, wrong spot. That's where you go to exeterlms.com. My computer's so slow. But essentially, you will log into exeterlms.com, and then your curriculum will pop up, and there are interactive lessons that you'll be going through. So the first week of CSS, you want to make sure that you have completed all the lessons and projects for HTML and CSS by the weekend. So if we look in here, sign in, this is like a dummy account, so you'll see here, this is your dashboard, and then this should pop up with CFS, but you'll click on that, and then you can go ahead and go through the lessons.
Yeah, I signed into mine this morning, and it said I have nothing.
You're not enrolled? Okay. You want to do you know who your mentor is already?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Message your mentor on Slack and let them know that nothing is popping up on your dashboard. That way we can get you enrolled immediately.
Okay.
Perfect.
And I have no my mentor is.
You do not know your, okay, so send me a message after this lecture and let me know that with your full name and your email address and when you started, and then that way we can make sure you get a mentor.
Okay.
All right, well, if anyone has any other concerns, go ahead and feel free to message me on Slack. But if there are no HTML or CSS questions, we'll go ahead and end the lecture. Thank you all for attending.